Okay, welcome to this meeting of the decision session for the Executive Member for Finance and Performance, Monday the 14th of June, the first time in a long time we've been able to meet in person, face to face. I'll try and remember how we go through things. So first of all, declarations of interest. I have no interest to declare. Item 2 is the minutes of the meeting on the 15th of March, which is the first time in a long time I can actually physically sign. I'm happy to do that as a correct record. Which brings us to item 3 on the agenda, public participation. We have 2 members of the public who have dialed in to address the committee today. Under ordinary rules, you would have 3 minutes, but we're going to extend that to make sure you have complete time to get your point across as clearly as possible. So keep as close as you can to 3 minutes, but don't feel that's a need to rush and speak as clearly as you possibly want to. So the first member of the public is registered to speak on agenda item 4. And that's Shannon Edwards, who is a committee member of the Community Benefit Society, named Friends of the Jubilee Limited. Shannon, are you there?
I am. Good morning.
Thank you. You have approximately 3 minutes.
Good morning. I'm Shannon, and as mentioned, I'm a member of the Community Benefit Society called Friends of the Jubilee. We organised in September 2020, and we've met fortnightly since. We've channelled our energies into objecting to the most recent planning application for partial residential conversion of the Jubilee, creating a community benefit society registered with the Financial Conduct Authority as of April 2021, and gaining public insight and input through a leafleting campaign. Our group nominated the Jubilee to remain an asset of community value, and I'll now elaborate on the reasons why. Recent past. The Jubilee was operational as a public house for 119 years until April 2016, when Enterprise Inns, now Stonegate Pub Partners, the largest pub company in the UK, disposed of the site. Tricor Development purchased the building and land with the intent, as their name suggests, to develop the site for residential use. Obviously, this ensured the Jubilee no longer served the community as a public house. However, no change of use nor successful planning permission for residential conversion has ever been granted, despite 9 revised sets of drawings, 1 planning inspector appeal refusal, 1 delegated decision refusal by City of York Council, and 1 City of York Planning Committee refusal. As a result, the Jubilee has stood vacant and without use since 2016. We believe it is uncontentious to agree that the Jubilee's years as a functioning public house prior to its closure are considered the recent past. Precedent from similar case law agrees. ZB Investments Limited versus London Borough of Croydon in 2016, the judge stated, in a case concerning a public amenity which has existed for 150 years, I certainly consider 2011 to be recent. Similarly, Hawthorne Leisure Limited versus Chiltern District Council, speaking in 2016, Judge Peter Lane said, given the long history of the King's Head Presswood as a pub up until 2007, it is, I find, correct to describe that as having occurred in the recent past. And lastly, in Croston versus Amber Valley in 2014, the judge stated, it is relevant that the Black Swan operated as a public house for almost 200 years until its closure in 2012. This substantial case history concurs the recent past is a relative concept and can be considered in context of how long a public house has been in use. In the case of the King's Head Presswood, 9 years previous was considered the recent past. Therefore, it is consistent with the legislative framework and legislative intent that the use of the Jubilee as a public house for 119 years until 2016 is the recent past. Furthermore, a developer has retained control over the pub for almost the entire period since its last operation and has rejected offers to purchase the pub where the prospective purchaser wanted to operate it as a pub, meaning then that this last period of operation must be considered the recent past. It cannot be the case that when Parliament passed the Localism Act, it intended that an owner could evade the effects of the Act and deny the community a listing simply by holding on to the pub and leaving it dormant for years. While the Jubilee was operational as a pub, it met the social well-being and social interests of the community. Firstly, it's the only ACV in our area. This is not due to a lack of local organisation, but rather a lack of local facilities. The Jubilee is a good example of an improved or reformed pub. These turn-of-the-century buildings had a range of eating and entertainment facilities in an attempt to reduce drunkenness. These facilities were utilised by the local community, who formed a darts team, pool team and golf society. There were regular karaoke nights, still symbolically advertised on the pub's external blackboard, private parties in the rail provision function room, and a garden with grass for patrons, something most of the houses around here lack space for. Although it's true to say that the pub lacked a good business model in recent years, both the City of York Council, upon the original listing as an ACV, and the Government Planning Inspector at appeal in 2019 found the Jubilee provided community facilities, and so satisfied the criteria set out in Section 88 of the Localism Act. So could the Jubilee provide for the community again in the future? As mentioned, the Friends of the Jubilee is a registered community benefit society with a dedicated and active members base who meet every fortnight. Our aim is to use the building to meet the day-to-day needs of the Lehman Road community. Support from the central government could come in the form of the Community Ownership Fund, which launches this month and is directly aimed at enabling communities to purchase assets such as pubs. The Friends of the Jubilee has recently secured support from the Plunkett Foundation, which runs a support programme specifically for groups seeking to buy pubs and operate them as community pubs. And the owner has now, for the first time, engaged with the community with a view to selling. This is in contrast to previous stances and probably as a result of the local and national government planning agencies agreeing that residential conversion of any part of the site would result in the loss of community facilities. The planning system is on the side of the Jubilee, having an active community use. Public houses are in the sui generis use class, along with wine bars, drinking establishments with expanded food provision, theatres, hot food takeaways, venues for live music, cinemas, concert halls, bingo halls and dance halls. There are a multitude of ways the whole site could be used to meet the social well-being and social interests of our community, and our CBS has formed to explore these. The Lehman Road community deserves the Jubilee as a community asset, and the Jubilee deserves to be protected under the Localism Act as an asset of community value. We hope you accept this nomination so we can get on with returning the Jubilee to public use and put this unfortunate period of dormancy behind us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon, and we'll take those into consideration when we consider item 4. Our second speaker is also on item 4, and that's Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor, are you there?
Morning, Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Callum. You have approximately 3 minutes. Do try and keep it as close as you can to 3 minutes, but don't feel rushed as the acoustics aren't great and we can't hear you if you rush.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Nice one. Right. So I'd like to hope that this will be one of the easier decisions you'll make as an executive member, Councillor Eyre. It's beyond doubt that the Jubilee is an asset of community value. The continuous demonstrations of that value over the last few years confirm this, be them from the tangible sense of loss that the Lehman Road area has had since it last closed, the continuous challenge which seems to be intensifying rather than waning from local residents to the current owner's intentions to change its use based on its value to the area, and the planning authority's repeated recognition of that, or the planning inspector's refusal of the owner's previous appeal, largely due to the loss of community facilities his plans represented, or the fact that there is now a residents group who are not just opposing plans for the building from the owner, but are walking the walk to bring forward their own plans to own and run the building for the benefit of the community, offering, yes, a pub, but maybe other amenities too, such as potentially a post office and a function room for community meetings, events, that kind of thing, and perhaps others as well. Also to throw into the mix would be the huge response from wider residents to this residents group survey for ideas and concerns about their own plans. They put out about 1,400 leaflets or like questionnaires across the Lehman Road area, and they had just under 200 responses, which for a 4-page survey is pretty impressive. Another point to throw into the mix, and I know it remains to be seen how it's going to pan out more positively, is the fact that the current owner is now in discussions with the Friends of the Jubilee Community Benefit Society on a freehold sale. Now, provided these discussions are genuine and made in good faith, there is good reason to think that this facility could be open again to serve residents in the next year or two. Next, I'd like to share a comment from the York campaign for Real Ale's pub protection officer, Nick Love, who's been closer to this campaign come project, if you like, for at least 2 years more than me. I was elected in 2018 to represent this area, but Nick's been closer to this campaign since around 2016. And Nick secured the initial listing of the Jubilee as an ACV back then. He can't be with us today due to commitments with Jorvik Radio, but he does support this renewal application. He says, nothing has changed since the pub was first listed. It's still an important community asset, as evidenced by the numerous refusals for planning permission and change of use by York councillors, and even a government inspector. I urge you to approve the ACV application. And with that, Chair, I would close in saying that I agree with Nick and urge you to also approve this ACV application so that the genuine, realistic and live efforts to save the Jubilee and realise its full potential can be achieved. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. And in the interest of transparency, I will say that Mr. Love is a long-time acquaintance of mine, and I have shared a relay with him several times, but I don't think it's pecuniary. And also, in terms of advertising, to point out other radio stations other than Jorvik are available, though Jorvik is a very good radio station. Okay, we'll move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the application for community right to bid under the Localism Act, and I'll hand over to Nick. Another Nick. Councillor Taylor's already said he agrees with you. I think you might have meant Nick Love.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Right, well, this report sets out a proposal to consider renewing the listing for Jubilee Public House on Balfour Street as an asset of community value. The asset was originally listed just short of 5 years ago, and the original listing expires next month. It's understood that the property has been a public house for over 100 years, opening in 1897. A nomination has been received by the Jubilee Community Pub, who we've obviously heard from, and they are considered a legitimate nomination body. And we've obviously heard about the benefits that they consider that property previously brought and which could bring, as outlined in the report. There has been an objection by the owner of the property, Tricore Developments, on the basis, again, as set out in the report, and in particular on the basis that the property has long been vacant and isn't viable for use as a pub. In order to actually consider listing the property, because it's vacant, under the Localism Act, a couple of boxes do need to be ticked. So that's basically the nub of the question here, and they are as follows. The first one, given that we have to consider whether the activities within that building took place within the recent past. And as we heard clearly from the first speaker, the definition of recent past, again, as set out in the report, is a little vague. So some authorities used 3 and 5 years as a barometer, but there are other examples where a much longer period of time has been considered. And it is usual to consider the context of how long that property has been operating. So as I said at the outset, actually it's understood this particular property has been a public house or was a public house for over 100 years. The other tick in the box which needs to be addressed is whether there's a prospect of this facility ever being viable in the next 5 years. So 5 years is the question. Obviously, that's a difficult one to quantify. But obviously the planned York Central development is in close proximity. So your decision is thus sought as to whether to list this asset having regard to those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I don't have any questions. I know Councillor Taylor did say this was perhaps the easiest decision I might have to make an exec member, but I think actually defining what is the recent past, which is what in many ways you're asking me to decide, is probably one of the most difficult things I'll ever have to do. And I hope, other than the ACV, I'm not held to a definition of whatever the recent past is in wider context. However, I think, as you've said, in this particular instance, given the long history of the property, I think that is quite easily within what I would class as the recent past. And what is viable in the next 5 years is a challenging question for all of us. And I know with your particular portfolio holder, we discussed this a lot in terms of what will be viable going forward in the future. And I think certainly with what's happening in that area and the commitment that's been shown by the community, I think it certainly does pass that test in terms of suggesting that it will be viable in the next 5 years. And I think just to also commend the work I think we heard from Shannon Edwards, and clearly there is a huge amount of effort gone on within the community to demonstrate the value of this particular pub. And I think some reflection on the value that they've given to that and the work that they put in. I think that's absolutely to be commended. And I think on that basis, I'm more than happy to approve the recommendations in paragraph 2 on page 7, and to approve the listing of the Jubilee Public House as an asset of community value. Thank you, Nick. We'll then move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the Castle Gateway update, and I'll hand over to the other side to Andy to introduce that item.
Thank you, Councillor. So this report gives us an update on the Castle Gateway master plan and the delivery of that master plan. The report asks for 2 things. Firstly, to note progress on updating, note the progress that we've undertaken in taking forward the Castle Gateway master plan, and then to approve the inclusion of the Castle and Ivy York public realm in the council's wider levelling up funding bid to central government. In terms of the master plan, we've had some really good progress at Castle Mills. We secured planning permission in December, and that site contains many of the key public benefits of the master plan, including a new public riverside park and pedestrian cycle bridge over the Foss. We've appointed Waits as contractor following an open market procurement, and they're now undertaking the REBA 4-stage designs, and will provide a full tender price for construction to enable executive to make a decision to proceed with the project in October, and that would allow us to start on site in early 2022. In terms of Castle and Eye of York, we're currently in the process of working up a planning application for the new public realm to replace Castle Car Park. That's been based on the public brief for the area, which was formed through extensive public engagement through the ongoing My Castle Gateway project. The planning application will be submitted in late summer, and the initial proposals for the area were shared in a Facebook Live Q&A last week, and early public engagement has been really positive on the emerging designs, and we'll continue to refine them based on that feedback. The key is that in securing planning permission, it will give us a shovel-ready project, and that provides the best chance of securing external funding for the project to proceed. To that end, it has been included, or will be included in a bid to the government's levelling up funding, round 1 of which closes on Friday. Each local authority has been placed into tiers by central government, and although we're in the lowest tier, that doesn't preclude us from making a bid, but it does need to be bold, it needs to be deliverable, and it needs to fit the government strategic criteria. We've assessed that criteria, and this project very strongly meets that brief. And the proposal is to include that as one of 3 projects that can form part of a £20 million bid. The other projects for inclusion are currently being assessed to give us the best chance of securing funding, with the final decision delegated to the executive member and corporate director for place. We'll know the outcome of that funding bid in the autumn, but if unsuccessful, the work won't be abortive. It's just one of a number of identified funding opportunities that are out there, and any work on forming the full business case will be appropriate for future potential funding opportunities.
Thank you, Andy. I think this is the first of the 2 papers, which are in many ways sort of retrospective papers, trying to get back into the public domain some of the things that have been happening sort of as we've been working from home under COVID. And I think, again, reflecting on that challenge we've had in COVID, to really commend the work that's been done in terms of consulting the public on developing these plans, which hasn't been as easy as we possibly would have had going back 2 years, but I think we have had really good positive engagement from the public in terms of the work we're doing, despite the challenges. And you mentioned those adaptations to Facebook Live and other ways of consulting, and certainly the My Castle Gateway, I think, has always been sort of at the forefront of how we've really been able to get the public behind some of the work we're doing. I think it is a hugely ambitious plan, and I'd like to see that, as I say, we're going forward about how we recast the city and how we recast spaces. Again, it's challenging in terms of funding, but we have the opportunity, and we have that bid that goes into the Levelling Up Fund. Again, trying to get that out into the public domain, it is a very tight time frame. As you said, we have to submit by Friday, but I was very keen to get as much of that information sort of out into the public and do that as transparently as possible. And that's why I wanted to get that paper here today, to enable people the opportunity to look at what we're doing and be aware of what we're doing. And obviously fully support, I think it will be a further decision later on in terms of what the final details of that bid are, but we'll really welcome the fact that we've been able to get as much information out into the public going forward. I think the bid is exciting. I think it will be a fantastic opportunity to really start to shape what happens in that city, to really develop it in the way we want to do it. I think it's a strong bid. I think it really demonstrates everything that the city has to offer and the way we do it, and urge both MPs, hopefully, to get behind that and really support that. And I think we're in a really strong position to get that funding, hopefully, coming through into the autumn. So I think with that in mind, obviously, again, happy to approve the recommendations at paragraph 2 on page 33. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
And that takes us to the final item on the agenda, which is again the additional restrictions grant restart element, and I'll hand over to Simon.
Thank you, Councillor. So this paper is about the additional restrictions grant, which is money that's been provided by government for councils to use at their discretion to support businesses through the COVID pandemic. In York, we've used that money to support primarily small businesses, micro businesses that were falling between the gaps of the mainstream grants that have been provided by government to businesses in rated premises. We've used the money to support over 1,500 such businesses in York, which is an approach which is actually very different to what's happened elsewhere in the country. We brought a decision to your session in January to set out how we would spend that money, working on from a report that we brought last November. In January, you'll recall that we were still in a situation where there were tiers, and it was about which tier York would be in. Since the announcement of the government roadmap on the 17th of March, we've moved into the current step system, and indeed we're expecting to hear later today whether we'll be allowed to move into step 4 of that roadmap, currently scheduled for the 21st of June. So the decision we brought to you in January provided scope for officers to take decisions in consultation with yourself and other executive members should the government guidance change. And clearly, when the roadmap was introduced on the 17th of March, the guidelines were changed, and in consultation with you, we took the decision to use the remaining funding from the at that time ARG allocation to York to make restart grants to all of those businesses related to the step at which they were able to open. So this paper sets out the basis for those restart grants that we made. They, as I say, were related to the steps, and the detail is provided in the recommendations in the background. There are still some businesses waiting for step 4 to go through the process. But essentially, we provided grants on the basis of the number of days that businesses were going to be shut from the 1st of April onwards. We'd already paid to the end of March, as government had advised us to do. We made payments which were basically pro rata of the amounts that you'd already set at your previous decisions, with the addition of a fixed payment of £200 for those who are about to open 11 days after the 1st of April, to give a minimum amount which would actually help them to do that. This has meant that we've allocated all of the money that we had in the first phase of ARG, and are now able to draw down further 1.4 million to continue to support businesses through the rest of the year. So the detail is all in the paper. I won't go through the precise amounts, but again, as you said, these were decisions which were made with your thorough involvement, and this is really an opportunity for you to take that decision in public. So I'd say the recommendation is for you to approve the amounts that set out in the paper.
Thank you, Simon. I think, again, this is one of those retrospective papers that kind of shines a light on some of the work that's been going on in the background for a long time. I know when I first took over as executive member for finance and performance, having spent years in the leisure portfolio, business restart grants and business grants and additional restrictions grants was not something I was ever anticipating having to deal with. And I think it has been a hugely challenging area for the past 14 to 16 months in terms of the short time frames, the real importance of that funding to make sure that our businesses are able to survive, the tight time frames, and the ability to get that money in, to get that money out and work out the criteria has been probably one of the most endearing things I remember from this particular period, and the work that officers have done, both within your team in terms of developing the methodology and the criteria and making sure that we're able to get support to as many businesses as possible, and also the work of David Walker and his team in terms of the actual payments to get that funding in and out, and with an amazingly quick turnaround, really. I think one of the things we will all remember is the conversations that were being had at the very start of the pandemic about why is people taking so long, and why is the money not there, and why is it not coming out? And I think we were one of the top 10 performing councils in the country in terms of getting that money out and into businesses as quickly as possible. And that was was not easy. There were many hoops that had to be jumped through in terms of the criteria set by government and there's checks and restrictions, but has been an absolute lifeline. And I really did want to put on record my thanks to all of those officers that have been involved with that. It has been hugely important to the city, and I think it's been reflected as well in terms of the business. And I think this was an opportunity to reflect on that and give us the clarity about what has been happening in the background. And we know sort of frantic telephone calls and Zoom calls at the last minute, having been announced that funding's coming, and then people obviously, it's very easy to stand up on the national news and say this money will be given to businesses. At that point, the phone rings in about 15 minutes from businesses saying, okay, this is fantastic. Where is this money? When do I get it? And that work that had to go on in the background to say, well, actually, it's going to be a little bit of time before we get the money. I'm going to get the businesses. And I think that has been really challenging. And I think huge amount of effort gone in terms of doing that. So with that, I say, happy to agree the recommendations in terms of the ARG. And I think we wait with bated breath over the next sort of 6 or 7 hours to find out what the decision will be in terms of the 21st of June and whether that support will have to continue onwards. And I think we'll be able to reflect that in some of the work we do. So with that, happy to agree the recommendations at paragraph 5 on page 64. Thank you, Sarah. With that, I have no urgent business, so I'm happy to declare the meeting closed. Thank you.